I'm Jimmy Lewis with Dirt Bike Test, and today we're talking about our long-term wrap-up of the 2019 Honda CRF450X. This is a bike we spent the better part of the last year with. We put over 2,500 miles on it. We've learned some stuff about it. We've modified it a little bit, and unfortunately today we're taking it all apart, putting it back to stock, and getting ready to give it back to Honda. So if you want to learn more about a lot of the modifications, you can see our update number 1, where we talk about some of the stuff specifically. In this video, we're going to talk about some other stuff we've learned and really who this bike is for. One of the first questions we always get asked about, how did you get that bike? How did Honda give you that bike? Why do you have it? Well, I've been doing this for a long time. I was the editor at Dirt Rider magazine. Before that, I was at Cycle World magazine. I've been doing bike testing for a long time, and I have a very systematic way of going about doing it. It's not just send me a bunch of parts, I'm going to bolt them on. We test stuff. We actually try to address needs that we've found from the bike being standard. And then we take into consideration who will be buying this bike. So it's stuff that when we start finding a problem, we try to address it, tune the bike a little bit, see if we can make it go away, get better. Does it make it better? Does it make it worse? And then we try to report back the information to you. So in our update video, you can hear us talk about the clutch. Is it a problem? Not really. You really have to be riding super technical stuff where you're, prone to stalling the bike, using the clutch a lot. But really this bike, that's not where its wheelhouse is. It really likes to, be moving. It's like a second, third, fourth, fifth gear bike, not necessarily a first, second gear bike. And luckily this bike has a sixth gear. And when you start going fast, that's where this Honda really shines. I feel like it's a much better bike for Western conditions, quicker, more deserty kind of conditions. When you start getting it back east, tight and technical, there's definitely better bikes for that type of riding. And especially if you're a lighter, smaller rider, this bike's probably not going to work as well as some of the others. But the same thing, when you start bringing this bike out west, when you start running in Baja speeds or Hare and Hound speeds, clicking through the gears, hitting bumps, that's where this CRF450X really shines. Another thing, if you are riding more than 80 miles, you might need a big gas tank. If you're not going more than 80 miles between being able to get gas, you don't need this modification. Our bike got about 41 miles to the gallon on average over its entire life. So you can kind of do the math, and that'll determine whether you do or don't need a bigger gas tank. We did, because we like to go a little bit over 100 between some of our fuel stops every once in a while. So that could be an issue for you. Do you really need more power? On our bike, we essentially added a freer flowing FMF-Q exhaust. We removed the airbox lid, and we added a JD jetting fueling tuner. And did it make the bike faster? Yeah. It made the bike have more power at smaller throttle openings. It made the throttle response a little more sudden and a little more aggressive. Now, do you need that? I could have rode this bike exactly the same speed when it was completely stock. It just wouldn't have the kind of throttle response and the more racy performance, but it didn't make it faster. It didn't really give it all that much more horsepower. And the reason I say that is if you want more horsepower, turn the throttle, run it at peak RPM, and you're going to get plenty of horsepower even on this bike if it's stock. And that is the one thing that's really good about the Hondas, is the way they sell them. You can ride them completely stock. They're going to be ridiculously durable. They're going to be quiet, and it's going to put out very good rideable power. Another thing we did was add some protection items. We added a better chain guide, which I think is always a good idea. We added radiator braces, again, a really good idea. We ran the stock skid plate because when we had this bike, there really weren't a whole lot of other options out there, and it has some dents in it, but it performed very well. We added hand guards. It's always a good idea. But when you're talking about protection, that's a personal thing. You know how much aggressive riding, how much you're going to go through rocks, what kind of stuff you need. And ours is sort of a suggestion, and for our uses, the stuff we used ended up working out really well. Onto the suspension, and stock is actually pretty good, but when we started deciding to modify it, we started getting picky. And it was mostly about getting a little bit better initial bump compliance And then we're retaining that kind of that good stroke control and the bottom resistance, you know, so that way when we got in the little bumps and the rocks and stuff, the bike didn't beat the rider up, and it worked overall just a little bit better. Like I said, this is being picky, and if you don't have the opportunity to ride some other bikes, you'd probably think that the Honda is excellent. So when we're doing this, the reason we do this is we ride so many other different bikes, we take all the best characteristics, and if this one is missing on one little point, we'll try to address it and get it there. Esp Suspension, this is George over in Montrose, California, did a really good job of kind of taking some of my feedback, and I've worked with him for lots of years, so he understands when I start telling him things. He made some little tuning adjustments in the valving, did some tricks that he's learned over the years, and we've got a really good setup here. It's frankly some of the best off-road suspension that I've ridden. It rivals, actually, it's for this type of riding, this kind of faster desert stuff. It's really good. I could take this and go race, let's say a Baja race. I could race a Hare and Hound on it, and I'm still happy and comfortable if I were to go trail riding. And one of the sad things is our bike sat around for a long time during the summer because it was so hot out here and we weren't riding it much. And then we got the Baja Designs headlight. Then we could ride at night, and that made a big difference. All of a sudden the bike started getting some miles put back on it. So little things like that. The stock headlight, it's not bad. It'll get you out in a pinch, but if you really want good light, you're gonna have to look for something else. Luckily, this Baja Designs light uses the stock charging system. It's plug and play, and it's like literally 5 times better light coming out of that front headlight. You really have to experience good light, and once you do, you don't want to ride anything that's stock anymore. And then we kind of get into durability, and this is a kind of a hot topic, and especially people that don't really ride too much, people that blabble a lot on the internet, because they look at owner's manuals and they look at specs. Those are written by lawyers and people that are being overly cautious just because this motor has a competition background done to it. And their Honda's going to be very careful. When they provide you with this level of performance, they're going to tell you, look, you got to do all this crazy maintenance. I largely ignore that stuff, okay? I'm aware of it. I can hear when motors start doing funny things, but trust me, we checked the valves on this bike once at about, it was somewhere in the 20 to 40 hour range. We didn't really need to, we just did it to see what it took to check, and trust me, it's a trick to get into the intake valve, but everything was in spec. When we pull this thing back apart, we're gonna check it again and see exactly where it's at to see if anything's moved. I doubt it. I wouldn't worry about a top end on this bike for well over 100 hours and probably pushing into 200 to 300 hours. And then the bike will tell you, hey, I'm losing power and or it's making a little bit extra noise. But if you're good at cleaning the air filter, if you're keeping fresh oil into the bike, this is the kind of stuff that the bike is gonna outlast the amount of hours you're gonna ride it probably before you would have to rebuild it. So, you know, take the manual with a grain of salt. Watch out for the guys on the internet that tell you differently. All of the competition 4-strokes have very short lifespans in the manual, but incredibly long lifespans when you're using them in their environment. So in conclusion, we're really happy with this bike, especially when you're buying it for the right reason. If you're the guy that wants to buy a bike, just keep it stock and go ride it, this is a great bike. If you want to do some minor modifications like we did, you're going to come away with a bike that performs pretty well. You could race it if you wanted to. You can trail ride it if you wanted to. It stays quiet even in the modified form. It's durable, high performance. And here's the best thing, and this is kind of like a backhanded slam, but Honda's not going to change this bike for quite a few more years. They might make some running updates in the near future, but for the most part, this Honda CRF450X will probably stay the same for, I'm going to guess 9 years. You know, if we still have dirt bikes in 9 years. But the idea is that if you want something that's gonna not get outdated, you know, KTM changes their bikes every 2 and 3 years, and all of a sudden it's like you feel like you need the next one. And in the grand scheme of things, the updates are kind of incremental, and until you're 2 or 3 generations, your bike really isn't that far off. So Where are all the Honda guys? Well, a lot of them are riding KTMs because they didn't want to wait 8 or 9 years for a new bike. But if you want to get a new bike, maybe you want to go back to red, I don't think you're going to be disappointed with one of these. So the 2019 Honda CRF450X is going back, but maybe we'll get another one soon.